John Lewis. You hear the name and you immediately think of this moral giant, right? An icon of the civil rights movement and, for decades, the conscience of the U.S. Congress. But how does a shy sharecropper son from rural Alabama, a kid who stuttered, become one of the most revered figures in American history? Well, in this explainer, we're going to trace that exact journey, a path forged in the fire of protest, from a chicken coop pulpit all the way to the halls of power. I mean, that is a statement of incredible conviction. But that kind of resolve, it doesn't just show up out of nowhere. It was built piece by piece, starting from his earliest days. So to really get the man who would write those words, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. And that beginning was in Troy, Alabama. To really understand Congressman Lewis, you first got to meet the young boy who dreamed of a world far, far beyond the family farm. This was John Lewis's world, a world so divided that when the county finally got around to paving roads, the asphalt would just stop, right where the Black-owned properties began. It was a literal line in the dirt, reinforcing the social one that was already there. From a really young age, John was just different. He hated the back-breaking farm work. He'd even hide under the porch just to catch the school bus. He and his cousin actually dreamt of building their own bus out of pine trees just to get out of Alabama. And his first congregation, get this, it was the family's flock of chickens. He delivered these passionate sermons to them, and that's how he earned his lifelong nickname, Preacher. And you know, his instinct for protest started right there, with the chickens he cared for so much. When his family would cook one for dinner, he'd get so attached that he just refused to eat. Looking back, he called that his very first act of nonviolent protest, just a simple, personal stand based on what he felt was right. And then a spark. Listening to the radio one day, he heard a sermon from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King called segregation a blatant denial of the unity which we all have in Christ. For a boy who already felt that injustice deep in his bones, those words gave him a name, a philosophy, and this profound new sense of hope. It felt like a calling. So, that calling, it led him straight to Nashville, Tennessee. He got there as a pretty shy 17-year-old. But that city, it would become his training ground. It's the place where the preacher would learn the art and the discipline of action. In Nashville, Lewis found the absolute core of the movement. He joined these workshops led by Reverend James Lawson and was introduced to satyagraha, the love ethic. This was the whole idea that nonviolence wasn't just a tactic you use in a protest, it was a way of life. The belief that if you endure suffering with love, you could not only change laws, but you could actually change the hearts of your oppressors. For Lewis, this was it. This was what he was meant to do. And they put this philosophy into practice with an amazing amount of discipline. I mean, the Nashville sit-ins weren't just chaotic protests. They were highly strategic, carefully planned campaigns. Students would dress in their Sunday best to show their dignity. They'd sit quietly at segregated lunch counters, books in hand. They were trained not to react no matter what was said or done to them. And if they got arrested, the rule was clear. You don't pay the fine. You choose jail, and you make the system pay the price for its own injustice. And you know what? It worked. The strategy was incredibly effective. As you can see here, after months of disciplined protest and enduring so much violence, Nashville became the very first major southern city to desegregate its lunch counters. It was a huge victory that proved nonviolent action could create real, tangible change. So, riding high on that momentum from Nashville, Lewis and the student movement took on their most dangerous test yet, the Freedom Rides. The goal sounds simple, but it was incredibly dangerous. They wanted to test a Supreme Court ruling that had already outlawed segregation on interstate buses and in terminals. The thing is, that ruling was just being completely ignored all across the South. They were knowingly, deliberately riding right into the heart of the opposition. The response was, well, it was more brutal than anyone could have imagined. In Anniston, Alabama, a bus was firebombed. In Birmingham, riders were met by a mob of Klansmen who beat them with pipes and bats. An attack that, allegedly, the local police had agreed to let happen for 15 minutes before they would step in. The violence was just horrific. To put it in perspective, one of the riders, James Peck, needed 53 stitches in his head. It got so bad that the original organizers, a group called CORE, felt like they had no choice but to stop the rides. So this was a huge moment, a real crossroads for the movement. But this is where John Lewis, who had been beaten himself, really stepped forward. He and the other students from Nashville argued that the rides absolutely had to continue, because if they stopped, it would send a message that violence works, that you can literally beat a movement into submission. Lewis was not about to let that happen.
And that kind of unyielding courage on the freedom rides, it cemented his place as a leader. He was elected chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, you might know it as SNCC, and he was given a prime speaking spot at the 1963 March on Washington.
So here he is, just 23 years old, and he prepares this fiery, revolutionary speech. His original draft was so intense, he threatened to march through the South the way Sherman did. That other, more moderate leaders actually pressured him to tone it down just moments before he went on stage. He did make some changes, but that revolutionary spirit was still there, calling for people to stay in the streets until the Revolution of 1776 is complete.
And the world took notice. After the march, Lewis was greeted at the White House by President Kennedy himself, who told him, "You did a good job." I mean, just imagine that. The young man from Troy, the preacher to chickens, had officially arrived. He was now a major voice in the national conversation.
The years that came next were just defined by his activism. He famously led the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma on what became known as Bloody Sunday, a confrontation so brutal it shocked the nation's conscience and led directly to the passage of the landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965. In that moment, it really marked a new chapter for him.
For John Lewis, the fight never ended. It just changed venues. He went from street-level activism to registering millions of voters. And then he entered politics, first on the Atlanta City Council, and then in 1986, he won a seat in the U.S. Congress. He never saw it as leaving the movement. He was just bringing the movement and what he famously called good trouble into the halls of power.
Which kind of leaves us with this question, doesn't it? The life of John Lewis suggests that for the people who are truly committed to changing the world, for those who answer that higher moral calling, maybe there is no line at all. Maybe it's all just part of the same long journey to redeem the soul of a nation.